You've probably heard of a mother's intuition. It's that special instinct that mothers seem to have when it comes to their children's well being. But have you ever wondered about other types of intuition? On this episode of Grieving Out Loud, we're sitting down with Kayli Beecher, an internationally known medical and spiritual intuitive. As an intuitive, Kayli doesn't rely on modern medicine to find the cause of physical, emotional, or spiritual conditions. Instead, she uses her intuition.
I know it's a little crazy. It's a little weird that I know so much about people with just their name and age. I get it. But I try to be very practical, and I teach people how to connect to their intuition. And I look at what can we start doing, real concrete things to start solving these issues.
Issues that range from gut health to grief.
One of the things that I love to do is to teach people that they can connect to their loved one in spirit. And I don't feel like there's anything special about me. I mean, I have these crazy abilities, but our loved ones in spirit want to talk to us far more than they want to talk to some stranger. Mediumship is great and you can get all kinds of information and feel better about it. And I love, love, love doing it. But our loved ones in spirit can hear us. They can feel us. They send us signals all the time.
Welcome to Grieving Out Loud. I'm Angela Kennecke, your host, and I'm so glad that you're tuning in today. We have a very special guest. She's an intuitive who uses her gifts to help those who are battling addiction and grief. It's an unconventional approach to healing, and I can't wait to learn more about it. Kayli, I would like to welcome you to Grieving Out Loud. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
Let's start off by talking about what is a medical intuitive person? I mean, explain a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I work very differently from most other medical intuitives, but the general concept is that we can kind of see into people's bodies, into their energy, know a lot about what's going on in people's lives. I work physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and to look at the root causes for what's going on in people's lives to try to remedy, any problems that they're having. But I also work with people on connecting to intuition, life purpose, relationships, healing trauma, all that kind of stuff. So it's not exclusively people that are having issues. And I do work with a lot of people who are going through a grief process.
How did you happen to get into this line of work? How did you know that you could see kind of what's going on with somebody or sense the energy?
From a very young age, I've always been able to pick up on people's energy and their thoughts and feelings, both being an empath, but also I knew that there were beings, kind of spirits around, and I would pick up on people who had passed away. And I kind of, knew things before they were going to happen, all that kind of weird stuff. And when you're young, it just feels very natural. So I didn't really think about it that much. I didn't really realize that it was anything different. And at some point I started to pick up on negative energy, and that was really scary. So I did not want anything to do with any kind of weird abilities or anything like that. But it was so much a part of me that I couldn't ignore it. And when I was 12, I started to develop a pretty severe eating disorder. And then it developed into bulimia, and I was suicidal. And it really was divine intervention that led me to contact our pediatrician when I was 16. I came home from school. I had never told anybody what I was doing, including my parents. And I just called and said, this is what I'm doing, and asked for the name of a therapist. And he recommended a Jungian counselor who Jungian people are very open to intuition, and so she helped me connect with that and learn to love and accept myself and my body and learn to deal with the problems that I was having, the eating disorder and depression and things, in a different way. I learned to talk to it like a friend and see what the purpose was and, work through things. So that led me to learning more about these abilities that I had, and they've just kind of been developing ever since.
It's so interesting to me because, first of all, it was the 80s. And so people didn't really talk about these things or let alone seek help much of the time.
Yeah, he actually said to me, I'm sure you'll be fine. And I said, I'm throwing up 3 times a day. I'm not going to be fine. I'm going to end up dead. So I'm glad that I pushed it.
So explain to me the difference between what you are, what powers you have or possess, and a psychic. Is there a difference?
I think there's a big difference. The way that I work, as I said, is really different. Just using someone's name and age, I create an extensive 4-page report about everything going on in their life and an intuitive soul painting. And so I send all of that information before we even meet. And then when we meet, we go over the information. We look at everything that's going on in a person's life and do a lot of problem solving, a lot of looking at what we can do together. What are the emotional and spiritual things? What are physical things? I cannot legally or ethically diagnose. There are people who do what I do who do, and that's not okay. I refer to other practitioners. I like to think about what I do as not very woo-woo. I know it's a little crazy. It's a little weird that I know so much about people with just their name and age. I get it. But I try to be very practical, and I teach people how to connect to their intuition. And I look at what can we start doing, real concrete things to start solving these issues. I'm a licensed counselor too. So, I get my information first from my guides. And then, the experience is also really, really valuable because I have a background in things like sexual abuse or eating disorders or, mental health and addiction. So I combine all that, and I feel like, and I'm not putting down people who do psychic work, but I feel like that's kind of more like predicting the future or, am I going to meet my soulmate or that kind of stuff. And I really take what I do very seriously. I really trust that people, trust me with their health and life. And I am a medium too. I do get information from people's loved ones in spirit, and I kind of incorporate that into the readings as well. But I've been described as a non-woo-woo person.
Well, whatever that means, but it does sound really interesting to me that you also are a licensed counselor. So you have that training in therapy in addition to these extra, I would call them extra things that you do, or how we were able to see people or how you're able to see energy. Have you reconciled in yourself these abilities? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like when you were young, you talk about just some things sort of coming naturally and then some things kind of being frightening as you got older. And did any of those things lead to your mental health issues that you faced as a teenager?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like not being able to be authentic and not loving and accepting myself and feeling very different from other people, especially the people in my family, were a big contributor to the mental health issues. And I didn't have anyone that I could talk to about the things that I was experiencing. Thank God I had my grandparents. I was very close to them, but I just couldn't really talk about it. So when I went to the Jungian therapist, and she basically validated all of the things that I was feeling and thinking and said, you're not weird at all. And this is a huge part of who you are. And it's important to embrace it. And also to not be afraid of what you're receiving, because love is always more powerful than negativity or evil. So a lot of people are afraid to open up to their intuition or maybe to talk to their loved ones in spirit because they think they're opening up this door of evil. And I don't think about it that way. I think about it more that if you're a good person and connected to love, that you're protected. I definitely am channeling a lot of love when I do this work.
Have you ever discovered something about somebody medically that they weren't prepared for, or do you not tell people everything that you might sense or know?
My guys discover a lot of things medically and otherwise that people don't really necessarily know what to do with, or maybe they've never shared before. So I am very careful about what I talk about. I don't want to scare anyone. And like I said, it is not my place legally or ethically to tell someone that they have cancer or, things like that. I will tell them the symptoms that I'm picking up. I will say it could be symptoms similar to XYZ and refer them, to practitioners who can verify what we're thinking about, get testing, things like that. But I'm very, very, very careful to help people to feel safe.
How often are you correct with those feelings that someone has something, whatever it might be?
I guess because of my background, I wanted some data. So many years ago, we did an informal study. I mean, me and I was part of a peer-reviewed journal that was directed by a medical doctor. So we gave questionnaires to 75 of my patients looking for accuracy. And then also some of them gave me access to their medical records to talk to their physician. So to show that this is what came out in the report, this is all I'm writing. And then these are the things that were already in their medical records, before they talked to me. And my accuracy came out to 97%.
Wow.
Pretty good.
That's real, very interesting. I'm always interested in the data as a journalist. So, I think that's great that you have some. We did some digging into research about medical intuitives and also found a study from 2020 on the National Library of Medicine website. During the study, medical intuitives examined 67 adult women. The intuitives had a 94% accuracy rate in identifying the primary physical issues and a 100% accuracy rate for detecting the secondary physical issue.
What was interesting is I was trying to do some research to see if there were actually other, articles and journals or things like that. And I could only find things about nurses and intuition and didn't find anything about medical doctors. And I thought that was kind of sad because I think that the best practitioners have a huge amount of medical intuitive ability.
Sure. Right. Because sometimes it is just a hunch. They hear some symptoms or what's going on with the patient and they have to go on their hunch, right? Before they get everything confirmed.
Exactly. Or just what part of the body is hurting, or they'll say it's experience, but I think it's a combination of experience and really, really good ability to tune into the body and to the person. And, I like to think that I definitely use my experience as well as the information from my guides.
We have so many people who listen to this podcast who are in the midst of grief. They may be at a different place on their grief journey, some a little further along than others. But we had a lot of moms and dads and grandparents listening to this podcast. And how does grief manifest itself in the body, do you think?
So many ways. First of all, there's so many different types of grief. And there's definitely grieving for lost loved ones. And then there's grieving for the memories maybe that you had with them, the times you've had with them, or things like for people who are ill, things that they used to be able to do that they can't now. So there's so many different types of grief, and it's really important to recognize that everyone grieves differently. I have seen it so many times that it can do the obvious things like, problems with your adrenals and cortisol and things, but I've seen it settle in so many areas of the body, whether it's aches and pains, anxiety and depression, which, is another one of those,
Yeah, right. I think everybody in the first stages of grief would tell you they have just so much anxiety, right? I never had a panic attack in my life until after Emily died that I can remember or know of. And, I felt horrible panic. Your whole world is shaken.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But even things like changes in heart rate or heartbeat, kind of an emptiness in the chest or a heaviness on the chest, having trouble breathing, maybe forgetting to breathe or holding your breath, gastrointestinal stuff for sure, even issues with things in the throat, things like maybe a Barrett's or indigestion or trouble swallowing, because there's all of these feelings, as you know, that you want to get out, but maybe there are no words for them, or words don't do it, or you've talked about it so much and cried so much. And what do you do with all of this?
I would say we don't have words to adequately express the deepest of emotions. We just don't. Words don't really help. And I'm a person that I would say I'm a wordsmith. I write for a living. And I didn't have the words, really the adequate words to put what I felt and what I experienced. I just didn't.
No, exactly. I mean, that's why I love symbolism so much. And I think what gave me the idea other than divine intervention to do the intuitive soul paintings for people, because the body feels things symbolically and doesn't need words, doesn't have words. So when I create the soul paintings, they're a depiction. They're all very, very different, but they're basically a depiction of people's bodies and their energy and their lives. So I can point out things in that or get information in a symbolic way that can open up conversation, that can say, wow, I'm getting kind of this gray feeling around this area or this inflammation here or things like that. And it opens up a conversation about, wow, well, what am I feeling there? And when did it start? And I didn't even realize that that was connected. And I love art therapy as a tool for dealing with grief and addiction, because you don't know what's there. It just gets processed at such a deep level.
So we talk about how grief can present itself in the body. What are some ways that you think are healthy for people to work through their grief so maybe they don't develop health problems down the road because of it? I mean, I think a lot of health problems do come from the trauma we experience in our lives.
Oh my God. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my whole book is about that, looking at all of the root causes for everything going on in your life from the time you were born.
The title of Katie's book is Heal from Within, a guidebook to intuitive wellness. In it, Katie shares her step-by-step approach to physical, emotional, and spiritual health. You can learn more about her book by checking out the show notes in this podcast. While you're there, we'd appreciate it if you'd give this episode a positive review. By doing so, you help us advance our mission of raising awareness about our nation's deadly drug epidemic and providing support to those who have suffered losses as a result.
One of the things that I believe is incredibly effective for dealing with grief, addiction, trauma is connecting to your intuition. And what I mean by that, Carl Jung called intuition God within. And the way that it was introduced to me, the way that I use it, and I still use this technique, and it might be something that the listeners can use. And again, it's in my book. But I think about intuition as this all-knowing force that is complete and utter love. It loves you and accepts you unconditionally. It's always with you, keeping you safe. There's no judgment. It doesn't care if you've showered or if you have makeup on or, whatever. It just loves you like your pet, And that for me, when I started my healing process, was God. I connected to God and God as our source. So there was no judgment. There was just love, I didn't have that earlier. I didn't even know who I was. So to be able to connect to a source of unconditional love that I like to call this perfect best friend that's always with you, keeping you safe, I think is very valuable, because even if you're by yourself, you feel less alone. And what other people around you are doing is less important if you have that core of self-love. And my favorite technique for that is to physically write out a question or your statement or feelings and direct it to your intuition. And then whatever you get, write that down, write back to it, and write that down. So you're having a written dialogue with it. And I still do it to this day. It's an incredibly comforting technique for when I'm, sad or anxious or anything. So I think that's huge. Giving yourself a break, knowing that there's no one way or no right way to deal with grief, to do a lot of self-care stuff, but especially to do things that you really enjoy. And you might feel bad, like, I don't even want to think about that. I don't even want to do fun things. I'm so depressed, I can't even, go there. But maybe connect with an activity that you used to do or have always wanted to do. I think movement is huge for releasing stress and trauma from the body.
Right. No, if I didn't exercise every day, I do it for my mental health. Maybe when I was younger, I did it more for how I would look or something. But as I get older, it's definitely to maintain my mental health. And I couldn't exercise the first few weeks after Emily died. I couldn't really do anything. Right. But as I started to kind of force myself to do that, I found it very helpful as a relief. And I don't think you have to, even walking, getting out in nature, those kinds of things can be so
Oh, it's great.
therapeutic.
Same. If I didn't do it, I'd be like, yeah, I don't even know.
Yeah, it's so good for your mental health and for processing so many things throughout the body, I think. But I do feel that a lot of people do get stuck in a loop in their minds, right? And it's hard. You feel guilty if you're experiencing any kind of joy or happiness like you shouldn't be. And I think, how do you talk to people who are stuck? Maybe years have gone by and they don't feel any better.
Right. No, it's true. One of the things that I love to do is to teach people that they can connect to their loved one in spirit. And I don't feel like there's anything special about me. I mean, I have these crazy abilities, but our loved ones in spirit want to talk to us far more than they want to talk to some stranger. Mediumship is great and you can get all kinds of information and feel better about it. And I love, love, love doing it. But our loved ones in spirit can hear us. They can feel us. They send us signals all the time. You can write to them and have them write back to you. And you can ask for signals too. But a lot of people feel like they don't know if their loved one's okay. They feel bad doing something, happy or whatever, when their loved one might be still in pain or not doing okay. They don't want to move on. So knowing that you can talk to them at any time and know that they are okay, I think is very comforting. And you don't need any special abilities to do it. And I think that's one of the things that I help people with.
Do you think that women have more intuition than men? I feel like I have a lot of intuition, and whenever I haven't paid attention to that, whenever I haven't listened to my intuition, whenever I've thought, oh, everything will be okay, or that's silly for me to think that way. There's no real concrete reason, you know, I will get in trouble if I don't follow my intuition. And I wondered if, especially I think moms have a lot of intuition, right?
I mean, I tend to think that it's equal, but I
Oh,
think that women have been more encouraged to use it.
you're probably right. Yeah, it's more of a feminine characteristic, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's okay for a woman to connect with emotions, to be empathic, to be sensitive. You know, being empathic is not the same as being an empath or having intuitive abilities. However, the more that you can tune into other people, then you kind of get your radar up for just being in tune in general. So I think that a lot of men that I know tend to use it in business, starting business, working with other people, maybe feeling out, is this a good investment or is this a good product to buy or whatever. So I think it's getting better.
And maybe that's also so hard when we do lose our children because I mean, I knew something was wrong with my daughter and I was taking steps and action, but then I think I should have done it sooner. I think we question ourselves a lot, when we lose a child.
Of course. And with any loss, whether it's from an overdose or a suicide or illness, we're always going to think, could I have done something differently? Or as a friend or whatever. And I think it's a very slippery slope because most parents I know and friends are extremely loving, caring people. And you're trying your best, or you're trying harder than your best. You're trying everything that you can. And it's kind of easier to try and take control and say, maybe there's something I could have done and get mad at yourself rather than feel some of that incredibly unexplainable grief, which just feels like this empty hole. And I think it's easier to just be like, well, maybe I can control my guilt or my responsibility. And it's not like that.
Right. Right. Do you have any other advice for people who are grieving? Anything else that they can do?
Definitely ask for help, whether you're at the beginning of the journey or you've been doing it for many years.
Well, right. A lot of people feel like they're in it alone, right? It is a very lonely, grief is a very lonely place to be.
It really is. And it's important to ask for help. It's important to be around people who get it.
That's hard.
Yeah. It can kind of make you feel worse in some ways because you're like, everybody together is grieving, so it intensifies it. But I also think that to be able to know that the person that you're talking to has had a similar loss.
Right. And what I meant by that's hard is I meant it's hard to be around people who get it because most people don't get it. And actually, we just started a support group at Emily's Hope, and it's a group of 6 mothers who've all lost children in a similar way. And I'm taking part in that first group because we're helping to, start it. And get it going and facilitate it and all of those kinds of things. And it's so interesting to me how these other women just know. I don't have to explain myself, and we're not saying things to each other that are making things worse.
Right, right, right. And I also think it's very, very important to be grounded and be in your body. Just so incredibly hard when you're grieving because you just want to be out of here. But the more that you are in your body and present, then you can pick up the signals of if you need to rest, if you're sick, if your grief is manifesting physically or emotionally. If we're not in tune and not here and not present, we can't pick that up. And so those are the things that lead to addiction and all the related things.
Right, right. It is very hard, though, in our society and in our culture. I'm a type A personality, so I may be having a hard day or a little more stressed or not feeling so great, but it's hard for me to stop and listen to my body. Can be a really hard thing to do. We're expected to keep going and producing.
I have this thing that I like to call the feather and the sledgehammer. If you get a rush of a feather, meaning if you feel a little tired, get a little sore throat, maybe people cancel on you, any number of little things, maybe you get a little stomach ache, something, and you choose to ignore those rather than pay attention and take action, then our body and spirit has to come along and whack us over the head, because that's the only way we're going to pay attention. And believe me, I've been there. I try to be more feather oriented the more I know about this stuff.
I'm smiling because I have to be whacked over the head for sure, just to stop me. And then I just get knocked down and I can't get back up. Right. So I'll get something severe. Yeah. Because I ignored all the little things and I just kept going.
And there's a lot of purpose, in getting really sick or getting into an accident or whatever. And it really shuts you down. And it's also fascinating because when people get sick or whatever, they think it gives them an excuse to say no, to do more self-care, to be like, I can't do that thing you want me to do or whatever. And people don't realize that you don't need an excuse. You can just use your voice. So sometimes having something bad or scary happen to you is really a catalyst. Like with me, the eating disorder and depression and stuff, I am so grateful for it because I would not have found self-love. I would not have separated from people who were really negative. I wouldn't have found my voice. So it was really a necessary thing.
It's hard to be grateful for the suffering. That's for sure. I mean, yes, but good can come out of suffering and it can teach us a lot, no matter what that suffering is, whether that suffering is dealing with a mental illness, dealing with an addiction, dealing with a loss. There's multitudes of suffering out there, right? But it can teach us a lot.
It definitely can. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it. Recovering in that whole period of my life was absolutely the most difficult thing I've ever done. So that's not to say that any of it was easy. And I think when you lose a child, that is just beyond anything comprehensible. Some people go on to do things in honor of their kids, like you have. It can change people's lives in a lot of ways, positively and negatively, but everybody does things differently and that's okay.
And I always say that, you find what works for you. You don't have to do what I did. I had unique circumstances and everybody's circumstances are different, right? So you have to do what works for you and your life. How would you suggest that people get better in touch with their intuition? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite thing is that written technique that I just explained. What I like about the writing part is when you try to connect with intuition in your head, you can get very distracted. There's sounds and things and what am I having for dinner and all of this stuff. So when you sit down to write, first of all, you have to stop what you're doing to write. And you're looking at the piece of paper, you have the pen, so you're kinesthetically involved. Your body's involved with it. It becomes more of a whole experience. And I like to call it a mindfulness meditation. I think meditating is hard under the best of circumstances, but it's when you're breathing, right? So that is my very favorite technique. And you can also talk to your body in the same way I talked to my eating disorder when I had it. Like, what do you want me to know? Why are you here? How can I help you heal? Talk to the grief and ask it, what can I do to help you? How can we get through this together? And instead of thinking of it as a total enemy and something that you have to push down or hate. Befriending it a little bit sometimes could make a big difference.
One thing I learned early on in my grief, because I'm a researcher, so I look for answers and solutions, right? And I look to other people who've been through something similar. And I learned pretty quickly that there was no antidote. So there was no pill I could take or drink I could drink or something I could read or something I could say or think about that would take it away. I learned that very quickly. And so I discovered that I had to just be in my grief, no matter how painful that was, and it wouldn't kill me or last forever, right? Like it lingers, grief lingers, but the intensity of the grief subsides.
Yeah, I mean, definitely pushing it away or pushing it down often makes it stronger.
Right.
A lot of it is just being in that pain, and it's horrible. I feel like I'm going to die, but I haven't died. Like you said, there's no magic pill. It's something you'll have with you in some form or another forever.
And most people, I think, would rather find a way to avoid all that pain, right? If we could, we would all. I mean, that's human instinct, right?
It's why addictions are so prevalent.
More so than ever, because we live in a very broken world. Yeah.
You do, it's true.
Well, do you have any parting words of advice for people? Anything you like to leave people with?
I would like to share again that you are connected with your loved ones in spirit. They're always with you. You can talk to them at any time. It's not your imagination. It's not wishful thinking. Don't doubt it. You don't have to prove it to anyone. And so many people who've lost loved ones would totally agree with me. They already know this, Right before my grandfather died, in fact, the night before, he showed up at my grandmother's house and was sitting in his chair, plain as day. He had been in hospice. And that was her way of knowing that he passed. And I actually helped him pass the next day. But if you were open to things, and I've had people say, well, they used to show me signs. They used to show me they were there. I used to hear them. Just keep asking for it. Talk to them. When you hear the voices in your head, that's all.
Why do you think that is, that somebody maybe would have some signs initially and then they would those signs would kind of fade away?
Yeah, that's a great question. I often feel like sometimes they're there at first to be really comforting. And then the person in spirit feels like they really want their loved one to move on. And so by sending them signs, it's a way of keeping them kind of attached to them instead of moving forward. Maybe they think that it makes them sad because sometimes it can. I've seen things like that for sure.
But keep talking. That's your advice. Keep talking and keep up the conversation. And you're not the only person who's told me that on this podcast. I talked to a grief expert who said how important it is to write to your loved one, to write to them.
Just find something that for you is helpful and go easy on yourself and do a lot of nurturing.
Yeah, being kind to yourself is such an important thing. Such an important thing. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope it's helpful for people.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. If you're looking for more podcasts and resources for help, head over to our website, emilyshope.charity. Together, we can raise awareness about our country's drug crisis and hopefully prevent future tragedies. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Anna Fye.